Hello, everybody. We have a very special guest tonight, my Wario, the person who stole my name without my permission and changed it. And I'm not very happy about this, and he's going to have to be held to account. They're going to have to be held to account, I'm sorry. So, tonight we have Comrade RedBlackGuard. What do you have to say for yourself? Why'd you steal my name?
I apologize for nothing, man. I'm just gonna have to get over it.
See, typical settler. Wait, you're not a settler. I'm sorry. Your ancestors were here long before mine were. So, how are things going up there is it Vancouver you live in?
I live in the Victoria area,
I don't know where that is.
It's like on the island that's across from Vancouver Island.
I don't know where that is.
Yeah, whatever. It's there. It's near Vancouver.
I know it's there. Anyways, so there's been some.
You can imagine north. Yeah.
So there's been some weird happenings going on in Maine today. Somebody, for whatever reason, went into a restaurant and a bar, I think, and killed like 22 people.
Large.
Two separate events.
Can you tell what kind of weapon that is he has in this photo that has been released? What questions do you have about what not only what that is, but what he could be doing right now, given he's apparently not been captured yet?
So they haven't caught this guy, so he could be out there killing more people for all we know. It was a bowling alley. I just saw the bowling pin. So a restaurant and a bowling alley in Lewiston, Maine. Comrade RBG called this the most Canadian part of America. I don't know. I think Minnesota would beg to differ, but BRG plus RBG rap battle win. I don't know. Do you know how to rap, RBG? Oh, did we lose you? Hello?
That's an AR-15.
Typical fucking anarchist. 1 second. Typical fucking anarchists can't get their shit together. But anyways, yeah. Mass shooting in Lewiston. They don't know this guy's motivation. They don't know why this guy did what he did. Hopefully he's caught soon and murdered. But until then, that's what's going on up there. So let me send RBG another link because they can't get their shit together. But it's okay. We'll help them. So, while we're waiting for them to come back.
Style rifle. It appears he has a telescopic sight mounted on top of it, which he seems to be looking over. Some of those sights come with a laser optic where you can see a red dot on the sight. Hello. So you can actually look from a distance.
I can hear you.
See the dot is where the bullet is going to land. That's awesome. Kind of.
We got to get your shit together, right, RBG.
What I was trying to say was,
yeah, we got to get your shit together. You can't have you doing this.
Well, what I was gonna say was that I used to rap when I was like 5 after watching 8 Mile, and then never again.
That is the most Canadian sentence I've ever heard. I used to rap when I was like 5 after watching 8 Mile, but I don't do it anymore because I don't want to embarrass myself. Oof.
Trust me, 8 Mile is like a pinnacle of like Indigenous, like modern culture up here.
Yeah, so I've heard. You know, it's funny. Like, that's a thing in the United States too. Not saying that 8 Mile and Eminem is like black culture, but hip hop is black culture. And it's funny, like when you read about the reservations in the United States that a lot of indigenous people were made to live on, like a lot of them are really, really into urban black culture. Like you've got rap ciphers going on the res. You've got people who identify as Crips and Bloods and stuff like that. It's really fascinating how oppressed people tend to gravitate towards each other's cultures. Is Alberta going to secede?
It's very natural.
The comrade asks, is Alberta going to try to leave
Alberta
Canada?
deserves to be dissolved.
Yeah, it's basically the Texas of Canada, isn't it?
It doesn't need to exist.
So, Landback. A lot of people don't know what Landback is, or a lot of people misinterpret Landback. Why do you think that is? Like, why are settlers, especially some leftists, why are they so afraid of Landback?
It's one of those things where land back could mean different things to Indigenous people, whether they're more liberal natives, they have those, and they view land back as being just the legal victories for land returning to Indigenous nations. But for a lot of us, it's something deeper. The process of decolonization, of obtaining Indigenous sovereignty for your nation. It's, for some of us, it's a lot deeper than what other people may have you believe. And then the other aspect of why people are scared of it, it's a lot of reactionary nonsense. A lot of people just assume it's genocide in reverse.
You're going to hunt us for sport.
Doing onto the colonizer what they did onto us, which is patently untrue.
I mean, even if they deserve it.
It's
even if they
for sport.
Yeah, even if they deserve it.
It's like, when you think about it, it's not possible.
I mean, yeah, there's a shitload more of them than there are. Like, even if
it's not in the realm of possibility.
Like, if we got all oppressed people, like, they would still outnumber us. So I guess.
Oh yeah.
I guess, like, tactically, we'd still have to, like, learn to live with them. But I've always seen Landback as, like, being, okay, y'all are still going to be here, but y'all are not going to have, like, these horrible regimes that fuck over everybody else for the sake of maintaining a high standard of living for white people. So Landback means that sacred sites, this particular site that I'm reading refers to Mount Rushmore in the Black Hills, which were illegally stolen from the Lakota people. So sites like that are going to be given back and are going to be under the exclusive sovereignty of the indigenous nations to which they have always belonged. And Canada and the United States and other settler colonial regimes, because it's also a term that's used by the Maori people in New Zealand, or Aotearoa, and Australia, the Aboriginal people in Australia. So everywhere that settler colonies have been foisted onto indigenous people, there's a struggle for land back, right? Did we lose RBG again? I swear to God. And we did. I think the polar bears are chewing up their fucking lines. Because they have those in Canada. Polar bears, very dangerous and brutal creatures. Dex, leave the polar bears alone. Can you hear me? Streamlabs is cursed. Yeah, next time I might start using StreamYard. Somebody turned me on to that. Anyways, can you hear me? Oh, fuck me. Don't fuck me. That's not what we're here for.
Hello? Can you hear me?
I can. I think it's your internet, man. Anyways, so next time I might try StreamYard, because apparently this doesn't work very well for people in foreign countries with bad internet connection. That's okay.
To our relatives,
I'm away from the router from where I am. So
What's that?
anyway, what were we talking about?
We were talking about how Landback is a global movement. Are you good now?
What were we talking about?
I said we were talking about how Landback is a Landback. Hey, I like that. Landback. All land to black people.
Oh yeah.
Did the polar bear leave? Like, do I need to send help or something? I don't want my guests being eaten alive.
do you hear us inside of there?
So there's this film. It's up a Landback film. Let's watch it.
Our relatives inside of Kennedy County, we wanted to remind you that you're not forgotten, that we love you.
So apparently in South Dakota, they do to indigenous people what the rest of the country does to black people. Like anywhere that there is a substantial amount of indigenous people, they always, for whatever reason, end up in a jail and prison.
That we remember you, that we know that you're in there as a result of an unjust system.
Indigenous people make up 8.7% of South Dakota's population, yet they are roughly half of those booked into jails in the state. That's crazy. Do they do the same thing in Canada?
Oh yeah.
Because I've heard of there's apparently like I think this was in Saskatchewan.
Yeah, it's almost the exact same thing. If you like when it
Like in Saskatchewan, there was something called like a Starlight
yeah.
Tour, where they would basically,
I think I know what you're talking about.
yeah, they would basically grab people up and throw them out into the fucking snow so that they could freeze to death.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and that's very similar
Starlight
to.
drives, if I remember correctly.
Uh-huh.
They would just find drunken natives and pick them up, drive them out, because they didn't know where they lived. They just threw them out out in the middle of the plains in the middle of winter.
Instead
And
of
they just
finding
froze
out,
to death.
instead of finding out where they lived, they chose to just throw them out in the fucking middle of a Canadian winter. Like, we've received Canadian Arctic blasts down here in St. Louis. They are not fun. Like, I think last year we had a wind chill one day of like negative 45 degrees Fahrenheit. So I can only imagine what it's like in Canada, where these things come from. And that's fucking horrible. It's kind of similar to a story that I read about. This happened recently. A cop in Mississippi ran over a black dude, and instead of telling his mom, like, he knew where this guy lived, but instead of telling his mom, who might righteously get angry, he and the police department just buried the kid, didn't tell his family shit.
And us, we came together, your relatives, to stand with you.
Oh yeah. None of this
As we
stuff
stand
ever
against
really
the
changes.
President of the United States.
No, it doesn't.
As we fight for our land. And we remember
Same
you.
shit,
We'll
different
make
time.
prayers for you.
Same shit, different asshole, more like.
So we're here to stand with everybody throughout this nation to call out white supremacy, to call out an end to systematic racism and oppression of our communities and our people. Tomorrow, the President of the United States will be coming to the heart of the Ashanti Shakoi, and he's not welcome here. And we're here to send a message that we want Mount Rushmore closed and the return of that land back to indigenous people. So we're here in solidarity.
RBG, One of the chat has a question for you. Do you think the Highway of Tears is not just caused by racist negligence by the RCMP, but also active violence from Canadian police themselves?
That's the interesting thing. I think one can easily assume yes, given the behavior of the RCMP. But it's the saddest thing about the Highway of Tears is that there are no answers or assurances that we can get from it. There's just so much suffering from that one road that I was born on, by the way, that and none of it has been documented. There's just a complete lack of information. It's a big old black hole for Indigenous women.
So for those of us who are not
I would
familiar,
assume so.
So for those of us who are not familiar with the history of Indigenous Canadian people, well, First Nations people in Canada, what exactly was the Highway of Tears? I pulled something up about it. It's a 725-kilometer corridor of Highway 16 between Prince George and Prince Rupert, British Columbia, Canada, which has been the location of many missing and murdered Indigenous women. So is this like a human trafficking corridor or something?
Yeah. It's the Skeena Highway.
Mm-hmm.
It's, one could say that, but it's just a stretch of road in which there have been a huge number of disappearances of Indigenous women. My mother has lost someone on the Highway of Tears. Don't know where she is, but it's one of those things where we don't know. It's just a system of racial discrimination that resulted in this nightmare road that I used to drive on all the time as a kid. Go up and down, and now growing up, and I look back at it, I realize the history, and it's like, wow, that was a part of my life. And it still is.
That is fucking crazy. So there's just an entire stretch of road, like 725 kilometers, where people just go, Indigenous women just go missing all the time? Like, this is something that's still going on. We lost the comrade again. They have very spotty internet connection. It's okay. They'll be back. But there's actually a documentary about this from Vice. Welcome back. I pulled up a Vice documentary about this Highway of Tears
When
thing.
it comes to covering these topics.
What's that? I didn't hear the first part of that.
People are going missing. Kids are
Vice has been pretty good when it comes to covering these topics, surprisingly.
It's cool. It's like 16 minutes. But like a lot of people may not know about this. Like Americans don't even, like Americans are very, very insulated people. You know what I'm saying? Like Americans don't even know what happened to their own indigenous people, to the indigenous people that actually lived in this country. So Canada might as well be the moon to a lot of them. But like, this is something that people need to hear about.
It doesn't matter who they are or what their race is or anything. It shouldn't matter, especially in Canada. But, you know, there's a lot of people would tell you it does.
We're going to fly up Prince George, and then what's sort of on the agenda?
I guess we need to think about where I'm going to go to try to find some of these people. They're a little bit on the criminal side, so I don't anticipate them wanting to be happy that I'm in their face at their door. So we'll just wing it, and things look bad, run like hell.
Okay.
And that's the thing, like, Americans think that Canada is like this really happy, progressive country where everybody gets free health care. Like, and then all of the shit about the masses of people who were buried like indigenous kids, like little kids who were buried in boarding schools. I don't know. I just started watching this documentary. I have no idea who this person is. Maybe RBG might know. But like, we have this myth that Canada's this happy place with no racial tension whatsoever. And then hearing about stuff like this, it shocks a lot of people. Like, the average American would never know that there's a highway in Canada where hundreds of indigenous women have gone missing. Like, nobody knows about that down here. I guess unless you live by the border.
Had no idea that women were going missing and being
I forget a term
murdered,
that someone termed.
and that
Word someone termed for this kind of thing, where it's selective memory about what a society chooses to remember and how that reflects on them.
Yeah. And Comrade Ikra says, for me as a non-indigenous person, it's super sad that virtually no white leftists are talking about the Highway of Tears or IWG, which is as much a part of the genocide in my option as the cultural genocide. So do you agree with that? Like, yeah, like from what I've seen from the Canadian left, they are very, very centered around issues that impact settlers, that impact white people. But like, there's referring to indigenous people, they tend to only use them as use y'all as tokens, right? Or as cudgels.
Oh yeah.
Like, I remember when the whole Wet'suwet'en crisis was going down.
I'd say I do.
When the whole issue with the Wet'suwet'en fighting against the pipeline was going down. Like, there was very, very few Canadian leftists. I think the RCP, which has since collapsed, sent like a delegation there that spent a day or something. But like, in terms of actual material support, like, why aren't leftists organizing crews to go out and help find these missing women? So that's fucking disgusting.
I think a lot of leftists, or especially mainstream ones, still view the status quo as something to uphold. I guess much like how Democrats in the U.S. view it.
Yeah, something to be tweaked a little bit, if you will. Oh yeah, we need more free shit for whitey. But like, indigenous people, I guess, could just fall into holes in the ground as far as they're concerned. And like, you know, like the discourse around indigenous people in America and Canada, from what I've seen, like, it seems to me like they would just be happy if y'all were not around anymore, so that they could finish taking y'all's land and doing all of these other things. Like, y'all are seen as an inconvenience, kind of like black people were shortly after slavery. Like, okay, they're free now, but we don't know what to do with them. They can't stay here. So it's kind of different from the indigenous people's case, because like, y'all really have nowhere else to go. This is indigenous people's land. But it's like, if somebody is avoiding talking about something, or if somebody is giving a lot of time and energy to a cause that's going on all the way around the world, but you've got shit going on right here, like hundreds of women going, like, just disappearing, but nobody on the left is talking about it, like, that's something that they don't want to address because it might raise some other uncomfortable questions, right?
Oh yeah.
But that's fucked up.
more often than not, those women were Indigenous. And it was around 2002 that the Highway of Tears started being talked about a lot more publicly, and started learning about this other place in the province where, once again, women were going missing and being murdered. Most of the cases are unsolved, and once again, most of those women were Indigenous. Working as a journalist in this city, I learned about this guy named Ray, who is an ex-cop, and he's been investigating some of these unsolved cases on his own time, and he's agreed to let us come with him to show us what he's all about, and also really curious where he fits into the bigger picture of the Highway of Tears and, unfortunately, what's been going on there for a long time. We're here in Prince George, which is the
Canada's fucking beautiful, by the way. Like I understand that it has like in Toronto, like it has its rundown parts, but like especially like British Columbia, like it's fucking beautiful. I love pine trees. That's why I think it's beautiful.
largest city in northern British Columbia. About 70,000 people live here. And this is also the edge of what people call the Highway of Tears, which is Highway 16, 724 kilometers between here and Prince Rupert on the coast. And if you go by the RCMP numbers, 9 women have gone missing or been murdered along that specific stretch of highway. If you ask First Nations groups or just the communities along this route, they'll tell you that number is much higher.
Ray is in Prince George tracking a man he thinks may have been involved in one of the Highway of Tears murders. He won't give us details about which case.
The person that you're hoping to speak to, tomorrow or the next couple days.
Yeah, he's a low-level drug dealer and pimp.
And you've never spoken to this person before?
So what I'm seeing, I'm seeing a trend. Somebody brought up like these frontier border zones where people exist half in and half out of the liberal legal order, just attract all kinds of monsters, murderers, and sadists. Somebody brought up the femicides. If you watch Narcos, they actually talk about this in Juarez, where like hundreds of women have been murdered since the 80s. So yeah, like out of the way areas where there's a substantial settler lumpen element, like that's part of why indigenous people in the United States don't want pipelines on their reservations, right? Because for one, they're putting these things up there without their permission. But for two, it brings they call them man camps, like the transitory workers that come to work on these pipelines, make shitloads of money, like hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, and they open up bars and they view the local indigenous women as basically no better than prostitutes. So these people, these lower class, in many cases racist, white dudes come to town, huge numbers of them, and set up these like trailer encampments, and all sorts of bad shit starts happening. So that's part of why indigenous people don't want pipelines running through their lands, because it brings a bad element that abuses the local indigenous population. Like this. Comrade Ikra says they're a welder. They've been offered $60 an hour to go to Alaska.
This stuff isn't new either.
And weld pipe. And you've seen the kind of white guy that talks about how appealing these jobs are. Like I had a guy in college. He dropped out to go work the pipeline. And like I tried to argue with him. I was like, hey, you're going to basically be continuing the ongoing fuckery that this country and its government has been doing in reference to indigenous people. You shouldn't go there if you fancy yourself a progressive. And he was like, yeah, I get that. Well, he was a big Bernie guy, yeah? He supported Bernie Sanders and all of that. But I need the money. So that shows how, like, a lot of these people, never mind what it's doing to the climate. Oh, fucking Dax is going again. It's like fucking In-N-Out Burger. Anyways, like, it just shows a disconnect that a lot of settlers have with this. Like, yeah, they need money. That's all they care about. Money, money, money. Even if they fancy themselves a progressive, all they think about, all they care about, yeah, fuck you. I want mine. That's all they care about. That's all they want. They don't think about the impacts of their actions on anybody else. All they care about is how they can take other people's stuff, and they're going to justify that to themselves any which type of way. So yeah, that's why we need to educate ourselves in decolonial theory and center the voices of indigenous people.
I can't find him. I'm getting closer though. I mean, his name came from what I consider to be a good source.
So there are other people around that...
There are people that know. There's people, street workers in Prince George, they know.
If you've been trying to track down this person.
Dax says this is getting out of hand. Streamlabs keeps opening and closing on them. Hold on. Can you hear me? Ah, fuck. I'm going to try to call him on Discord. There's more than one way to skin a cat, so to speak.
And then see what happens.
I can't imagine. I mean, we're supposed to ask people hard questions, but I don't think I've ever asked someone, you know, did you kill somebody?
Hey, excuse me, have you got a minute? 1 minute. Thank you.
We've been following Ray around since this morning now, and he wants to take us to this old mill site that's apparently close to here. I guess this is this sort of situation.
Hold on. RBG, can you hear me? Help if I connect to my headphones. All right, how's that? Hello? You good? Leftist internet. This is how the internet is going to be under socialism. John Mossad sabotaging our efforts.
That you really start to question whose toes we're stepping on or how far he's going to go.
No.
Hello.
It's locked.
Hello.
What have you heard about?
Hey, what's up? Can you hear me? Hello? 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 Oh, boy. RBG is having more audio
Hello.
issues than Parenti. I heard you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Why do you sound so
My
defeated?
headphones don't want to work.
This is why anarchism doesn't work, RBG. See, I've had no issues with my audio or anything at all. No issues. But you, the anarchist, have been having a hard go of it. Why?
Well, you see, I live the proletarian experience.
You live the proletarian experience. And I'm a senior party cadre living off the backs of the masses, huh? Yeah, see, this is much better.
This place.
So, yeah, where were we?
See, what I did was I removed my headphones, which I don't know why that solved the issue.
Well, like I said, there's more than one way to skin an anarchist. I mean, cat. I didn't bring you here to make an ass out of you. I bring you here because, one, you stole my name, and two, I wanted to talk about Landback because a lot of people on Twitter are talking about it. So, where were we? Highway of Tears, right? So, you said you were born on this highway?
Yeah, in one of the cities on the highway.
Okay, you don't have to say which, but so you were born in one of the cities on this highway, and like these are all like poor towns, mainly populated by indigenous people.
They have a high indigenous population, but also an equally high settler population.
Okay. So it bears similarities to, like, I guess some of the towns in the South that were segregated, but now they're like half black and half white, half settler. My cousin actually like used to work down there, and he said that in like some of the more rural parts of places like Mississippi, which is where my family is originally from, like they like black people and white people still habitually, like there's no law stipulating this, but they still habitually line up in separate lines at like McDonald's and gas stations. Um so talking about this, we were talking about leftists, right? Like this whole highway of tears situation, like what the Black Panther Party in the United States used to do was, like, if this was happening, like they would send literal teams out to go and look for black girls or women that are going missing in the community. Like, why aren't leftists organizing these types of things in Canada?
That is the question.
Like
Huh.
all of these, like the thing that gets me about, especially like the ML Marxist, whatever you want to call them types, I eschew the term tanky because it's a stupid term. But like, yeah, why don't the tankies? They always are talking about like shit that's going on in Cuba. And okay, yeah, we should learn from Cuba. But if you spend most of your time talking about stuff that's happening in foreign countries and you've got women literally going missing in your country, and you talk about how you are qualified, uniquely qualified, because all of these little toy ass parties think that only they can lead the revolution, but you can't help find missing indigenous women in your country, like there's something seriously wrong with you. It's called hubris. But I digress.
Oh yeah.
Well, I have heard a rumor that some
So this guy, this white dude, he's a former cop, and I guess he wants to go help find the women.
of the missing people may have been disposed of in a beehive burner.
There are a few good
What's a
souls.
Yeah, I mean, this guy's not evil.
beehive burner?
He's doing more than the Canadian left is, it seems.
A beehive burner used to be used by mills to dispose
A lot of the organized
wood.
left here in Canada, I feel like it's more in disarray than not.
Yeah, like that's the left and the Imperial Core in general. Like if Hamas, the PFLP, the DFLP, and Hezbollah, all of these different groups who do not always agree 100% with each other, if they can get together and scare the shit out of Israel and rock Israel's world, like what's wrong with all of these groups who at least theoretically agree more than they disagree? Like it's like, why does Pepsi hate Coke? Because they're competitors. Right?
Chips. So they would blast them in, burn them up, and then I guess haul the ashes away. I know that there was one here, and this whole area is kind of interest to me because of various things that I've heard. So I thought it'd be a good opportunity to go and have a look.
Do you have any reason to think that some body would be here specifically?
Maybe. Maybe.
I've read, that RCMP have sent you a cease and desist letter at some point.
The RCMP doesn't want this guy. Like, what are they doing? Like, are they leading investigations to help find these missing people? This guy, on his own dime, on his own time, is doing the RCMP's job, and they sent him a cease and desist letter? That sounds like fucking corruption to me. Like, they might have had something to do with this for all we know. Like, cops have been caught doing shit like that before.
Yeah, I had given them some information, and I wanted to make sure that this was all clarified in writing. So I sent a letter to the staff sergeant in charge of EPANA and said, I'm coming up north to work in a week or two, and unless you object, this is what I plan to do. Mm-hmm. So he sent me a letter back and more or less said, not only will you not do that, but you'll not get involved in any of the cases, or you face the possibility of an obstruction of justice charge.
So they're going to arrest this guy because he's doing their job for them. Like that just sounds like they're embarrassed. That sounds like sour grapes. So That's fucked. You've got hundreds of mostly indigenous women that are going missing along this highway. And this guy, a former cop, so he's got investigative skills. One of the few good ones. They're always talking about not every apple is bad. So you've got a good apple here that seems to be motivated by a sincere desire to help find these people. And the police are telling him not only should you not be doing this, but if you go up there anyways and disobey our order, you will face a cease and desist charge, and you will face an obstruction of justice charge, and we're going to give you a cease and desist letter saying don't go up there, and if you disobey our order, we're going to put you in jail. Judging from Wikipedia, the focus of the RCMP is finding suspects that can pin specific murders on, rather than any prevention or mitigation. Basically, look, we got the guy, problem solved. That's nuts. This is depressing. Like, what is the American image of the Mountie, right? Americans think that the Mounties are like, oh, we're here to help you, and nice guys riding on horses, and they have the red serge, and they've got the funny looking pants, and they've got the Smokey the Bear hats. Like, no, like these guys are literal fucking cops. And they do, like, Canada echoes America in so many ways. Like, Canada is basically just British America. I mean, we did almost annex them at one time. So,
Oh yeah, Canada's like cultivated this idea that they're like a softer America, which definitely not true.
From that 5 minutes of that Vice documentary, there's really not much soft about it. Like, y'all's cops act just like our cops.
Oh yeah.
So another thing. Go ahead.
The RCMP's goals haven't really changed since they were first founded. Their original purpose was to suppress indigenous people on the frontier. Just to go out into these distant communities and prevent them from trying to resist settler colonialism.
Oh yeah. So they wanted to basically they didn't want a bunch of pound makers and Louis reels and Sitting Bulls running around, huh? I only know Pound Maker because he's in Civ 6. That shows you how much I know. History was what I majored in college, but it wasn't Canadian Indigenous history, unfortunately. I like Pound Maker. He's a cool dude. He never goes to war with me. He just plops his little cities all over the place, so I usually end up declaring war on him. But he's a nice dude. I like his themes. I also like his clothes. Anyways, so you identify politically as an indigenous anarchist, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so my question is, because I actually got a lot of indigenous contacts, comrades, friends, what have you, that identify as anarchists and have many, many critiques of Marxism-Leninism, Marxism in general, as it's practiced in the imperial core. So I was wondering if you could speak to that. Like, why do so many, not saying that you are a representative of all indigenous people, like some people, a lot of people do is they find somebody who's Lakota and ask them about the affairs of the Cherokee or the Choctaw. So that is by no means what I'm trying to do, but maybe from a pan-indigenous perspective, why do indigenous comrades seem to orient towards decentralized, if not anarchic, methods of organization and theory?
I think it's partially due to our own traditions of self-organization. We've never had our indigenous nations. We've never had individual leaders, kings, or emperors. We've had hereditary leadership But even then, that hereditary leadership very strongly depended on the people to support it. It was never just, oh, he's the king now. God has given him this right, and he now has the authority to lead. No, it's a lot of there's a lot of systems in place. Like the people have to actually follow this person. I'm if I was an old tribes person, and I wanted to find out where my family wanted to live or whatever, I could choose which chief I could be under, so to speak, which chief to follow, and I could choose to leave whenever I wanted, whichever community I wanted. I could leave and set up shop in another community if I felt the leadership wasn't up to par.
So that's just from what you said, that's definitely an improvement over some of the more centralized West African, never mind European types of organizations where, okay, I am your feudal lord. Your family belongs to me. You will work my land until you die. And I think like theories are the products of the societies in which they were created, right? Like Marxism, even though it's been adapted to the experience of colonized people of Vietnam, China, what have you. And keep in mind that like Vietnam, China, um, all of these places, most of these places where it was adapted, like they had um, authoritarian style regimes, right? Like China had an emperor, Vietnam had an emperor when it wasn't under the Chinese. Like Russia had a czar. So all of these societies which picked up Marxism and made Marxist revolutions and set up socialist systems, if you will, like they were coming out of an authoritarian type thing in the beginning, right? So you as an anarchist would say, so you as an anarchist might say that they swapped one form of authoritarianism for another. But you also have to consider that like these countries were huge. Maybe not so much in Vietnam's case, but like China and Russia, like I said, countries develop the systems that are best for them, yeah? So like Russia, I don't think Russia could survive under anything but like a centralized system because it's so fucking huge. Same thing with China. So my response to that as a Marxist might be to say that because these indigenous nations, if you will, were very small, right? Like they didn't have a massive continental empire like Russia or China. That type of system worked well for them because they were small and they were family, clan based, right?
Oh yeah, in a lot of instances.
Yeah. So again, that's historical materialism. Like systems develop in accordance with the material conditions of the nations and groups that have them, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like what a lot of I used to be one of those Maoists that used to say, yeah, Maoism is 100% universal. Every single aspect of Maoism must be applied. Otherwise, it's going to be a fake revolution. But like talking to indigenous comrades, like that's fucking chauvinist. Like you just laid out how your people lived for millennia, right? Like who is a black or a European or any other non-indigenous Marxist to come in and be like, hey, no, you have to have collective farming, like right now. Otherwise, you all are like Marxists are really good at using the terms backwards and primitive. That shows that it's a system that developed in Europe, right? But if it works for a people, who are we to interfere with it? Like you can leave. You don't have to kiss the chief's ass. Like he's not a feudal lord. You live under him because you like the way he runs his he runs the place, right? If you don't like the way that shit's being run, you can go and find another chief to live with. There's nothing wrong with that. Like why would you oppose a system like that? Or why would you try to meddle and interfere in a system like that? It's chauvinism. So
Exactly.
go ahead. I talk too much.
And while settler colonialism has eroded a lot of the systems we used to have, there's still a lot of core ideas that I think still remain and we still fight for, even if we ourselves don't actually recognize it. Like there is still a great deal of with the elected band councils that we now have right now, which were imposed to us by the Canadian government, we still view them with great deals of distrust. Um, there's high levels of corruption in a lot of our elected band councils, a lot of corporate interference, and it's created a new atmosphere of which both distrust of all authorities, Canadian authority, and even our own supposedly elected authorities, and formulating new decision making processes, I guess, new movements away from the system of us, the people, formulating our own movement and our own political organization.
Yeah, that's right. That's what I keep saying.
Slow, it's difficult, but
Yeah, that's what I keep saying. Like, you cannot just, especially in regards to people who have been colonized, like people who are not coming out of this whole European Marxist type bag, because Marxism was developed to deal with the issues of an industrial capitalist society, right? So indigenous people in Canada and in the United States never really had that sort of massive industrial type society. Like there was never a before colonization, there was no proletariat, there was no bourgeoisie. Like that system developed in Europe. It was not. It's not like that's a foreign thing to the indigenous makeup in the United States. So trying to well, like, why would you impose something like that on a people who have never had a well, they have one now. You have indigenous compradors, and you have the majority of indigenous people are proletarians or semi-proletarians, right? But before colonization, like, wow, that didn't exist. That didn't even exist. That didn't
like
even
the
exist.
process of being forced into being the proletariat into being forced into the working class, that happened extremely recently for our people and is still happening right now. I would say, I would
Yeah,
argue the process of
the
turning our people into workers.
yeah, proletarianization. And
Yeah.
that's why a lot of settlers they actually envied indigenous people. Like, you've heard of the lost colony, right? Roanoke.
Oh yeah.
Like people were thinking, like, oh no, these savages, they abducted, they ate these people. Like, no, what happened was the settlers were like, you know what, fuck this, and they ended up going to go live with the indigenous people. And I think Sakai talks about in Settlers how they had to put up a whole bunch of legal blocks and legal bullshit because settlers kept running off to live with the indigenous people. Never mind their slaves. Because we're like, you know what, this is fucking dope. Like if I'm toiling on a fucking plantation, I'm not gonna be hunched over picking cotton and tobacco for the rest of my life. If there's indigenous people in the woods nearby, I'm gonna run off and go live with them. Fuck this. Same thing. Settler can't get any land because little Lord Fuckerleroy has all of it. He can't get his little 30 or 40 acres land. So he's going to go live off the land with the indigenous people, hunt and marry into the nation. And yeah, like a lot of people did that. So like you said, this whole proletarianization process, because let's be real, it sucks being proletarian. It sucks being a proletarian. Like you have nothing to sell but your labor. You work day in, day out to the bone. Like, yeah, we're the class that's ultimately going to make history. We're the class that's going to save the world. But for now, this shit sucks. So
Yeah.
that so talking about that gave way to the whole romanticization. Like for the first half of American history, indigenous people were like the big bad. They're the people that supposedly steal into your lovely little log cabin in the middle of the night and take your scalp. But after most of the indigenous people had lost their land and been shunted onto reservations in barren areas of the country, we had this whole romanticization process. Like these people are in touch with nature. Like, have you ever seen that old ad? Like, I think it was for Earth Day or something. Yeah, where the asshole is dropping shit out of the car.
Guy?
Yeah. What was his name? Chase Iron Eyes? Yeah,
Whatever his name was.
Yeah, they had him in like this get up. I don't know if he was supposed to be Lakota or one of the Western tribes, because he had this big headdress, which he certainly wasn't entitled to wear. And he just, a single tear drops out. Like, okay, so first we spend the first half of our country's existence taking away these people's land. Now they're in tune with nature. And because we're fucking up the environment for ourselves, we should listen to them. I love welding. I hate being a welder. So yeah, from what you told me, yeah, indigenous people have no reason to not be anarchists. Like, just like the ways in which Marxism has been applied overseas, like, in a way, I see why you all wouldn't want that. Like, that's actually moving backwards from the regime, from the systems that you all had before the settlers came over here.
Oh yeah.
Like, would you want to work on a collective farm? I mean, I wouldn't have any problem with it, but some people might. Not saying you'd be a kulak, mind you, but
it's like one of those things where indigenous society and indigenous culture had an impact on European society.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it reached the intellectual levels of the Enlightenment era, in which you had, an entire society worth of people who lived under feudalism encountering a new system that they had never lived under before, that was seemingly more free. And the romanticization kind of started very early on as well.
Mm.
The demonization aspect was an aspect of like the settler colonialism. But for people who wanted to look to the future, they started romanticizing indigenous people. And eventually these like romanticized accounts of like indigenous society, like with the Haudenosaunee people, there was a book that was written about them that heavily romanticized their culture, while still based somewhat in fact in how they organize themselves. It still influenced the thoughts of some very important thinkers in Europe, namely Bakunin and Marx.
Was it
early on?
Was it The Last of the Mohicans?
I forget what the book was.
I
The
think
YouTuber Twin Rabbits made a great video on this that
Huh.
I'd watched a while back.
Yeah.
And it does talk about the influence of indigenous societies on the ideology of collectivism itself.
Mm. Yeah, because like Europeans and Africans too, like every nation has its history of what Marx would call primitive communism. Of course, I recognize that's very, very racist. Like, the Europeans are advanced and everybody else, the indigenous people, are primitive and backwards. But like the Europeans, like they had a sort of communal way of living before the enclosures, right?
Oh yeah.
So many of them, they still long for that. Oh, this is neat. I'm going to give them a subscription. But like African people, that's like saying indigenous people. The African people that I descend from, West African people, like we had our own communal tradition. And it was kind of like what you described. Granted, you had the huge centralized empires like Songhai, Ghana, Mali, all of those. But like you also had, especially in the interior, you had people living communal lives. You still had a chief, or they even called them kings in many instances, but it was not like absolute monarchy like you would find in Europe or China or Japan. So, and in many cases, memories of those ways of organizing ourselves remain, right? And people long for those.
Oh yeah.
Ubuntu, I think that's what that's what it was called. And I'm going to do a stream on African socialism eventually when I get around to it. But pretty much all of the African decolonial leaders drew on that tradition. And many of the theoreticians of African socialism talked about, like, hey, we never had that division. It's existed in Europe. I believe Kwame Ture also talked about this a lot. Ikra has a question for me. How do I feel about oppressed settlers? There's a contradiction in terms. Wanting to replace them with new settler projects like Aslan. And how exactly is Aslan a settler project? I've seen a lot of people make that assertion, but the Chicano people are, in major part, derived from indigenous stock, right? And they were dispossessed of their homeland. California, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada. Pretty huge chunk of land. Never mind Texas. So how can we define Aslan as another settler project? I've never seen a convincing argument in favor of that. Have you? Have you run into that argument before, RBG?
Yes. I'm not too personally convinced of some of the more reactionary there is a reactionary element in the Aslan movement that I've kept
cultural.
note of.
Yeah, what the Panthers would call pork chop cultural nationalism.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I don't know a whole lot about it, but I do hear some other things from other Native people, and they do feel very strongly about the Aslan movement. I think Rick from Decolonized Buffalo podcast speaks a lot about it.
Yeah,
I've seen a couple of his podcasts.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about. Rick is not a big supporter of Aslan. Maybe one day in the future we could have a debate between a supporter of Aslan and an opponent of Aslan, because that's something I want to understand too. Like Chicano nationalism, I'm a black nationalist. Actually, I'm a revolutionary nationalist in general. I believe that everybody who's been fucked over and who has had their land stolen deserves to get it back. But other than like studying the 60s and the 70s and the Young Lords and all that, I am not an expert on the various types of Latinx nationalism and struggles in the United States.
Yeah, it's one of those things where the Aztlan movement, alongside the indigenous movement and the black, the new African movement, they need to have stronger coordination and solidarity with each other, and that's not something that really exists right now. And it's something that needs to be built up a lot more for us to be more secure in each other's movements.
So I'm looking at the Landback site again, and they identify Landback as the reclamation of everything stolen from the original peoples: land, language, ceremony, food, education, housing, healthcare, governance, medicines, and kinship. So, like, I'm still trying to wrap my head around, like, why do white people oppose this? Like, there's nothing in here about driving white people into the sea. There's nothing in here about enslaving white people. Like, that's something that I hear whenever reparations or the struggle for New Africa is brought up. They think that we're going to just hunt them for sport. I've heard indigenous people speak about New Africa in negative terms too, but I just don't know enough. Where does New Africa fit in Landback? They actually mention this. Landback is a future where black reparations and indigenous land back coexist, where BIPOC, Black Indigenous People of Color, collective liberation is at the core. So that's a step in a positive direction. Like, there is no contradiction there. Like, it is possible for Black people and Indigenous people to share this land, like we've done it before. Good example, the Seminoles or the Black Seminoles. Like, you had runaway slaves. Yeah, you had Maroons from Georgia and South Carolina and Alabama running into Florida to live with these Seminole people. Granted, they were seen as being like, the Spanish used them as a buffer against encroaching British and then American colonialism. But like, you had an entire syncretic community that's developed. I'm also a student of what we call hoodoo. And there is a lot of indigenous African, indigenous American with a mild smattering of European influence. So we've blended and worked together before. There's no reason to think that we cannot do that in the future.
No. It's one of those things where we can't really have one without the other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Stolen labor on stolen land.
Exactly.
So there's a link on your Twitter, the Anarchist Network of Vancouver Island.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that's pretty neat.
Yeah, a bunch of comrades. We all got together in our locality and started networking, trying to do something real and tangible.
That's cool. Yeah, I see you have you're in community and solidarity with Palestinian anarchists.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, support Palestinians defending their community from the genocidal settler colonial state. Oh, somebody asks a question. What kind of social political entity would be able to accomplish land back? What role will there be for existing indigenous nations as recognized by the settler states? I don't know. That's something for the future, right?
Yeah. And I
That's-
think we can kind of like describe some of the future. Like, I'd say for a lot of Plains nations that have a very high population that's very culturally more homogenous than not, like the Cree or the Lakota or the Navajo, they can form really large nation states if they want. But for here in the Pacific Northwest, we have dozens of nations, dozens of languages of people, and getting us all on friendly terms with each other for a decolonial project to accomplish land back, I think requires federation building more than nation building. Which, I don't know, my take on that.
Yeah. Federation building as opposed to nation building. That's an interesting concept. Like, so many Marxists are like dogmatically attached to Stalin's definition of a nation that anything that, I guess, flies in the face of that definition is it's another third thing, and that third thing is bad because it disagrees with Daddy Stalin, right? So when we're like I said before, like, you're talking about categories, and you're talking about systems, and you're talking about ways of organizing, and you're talking about ways of getting what we need to survive that have nothing to do with Europe. Like, Stalin was still working out of a European context. Marx, Lenin, Engels, like, these guys were all right guys. They were good guys. I've learned a lot from them. But at the same time, we have to consider that they were still European, Stalin being Georgian notwithstanding. So we cannot just glom categories that were developed in a European context for Europeans onto indigenous Americans or Africans or Latin Americans.
Yeah. And like the concept of, I call it federation building, I don't know the exact word for it, is not unfamiliar to indigenous peoples. We were not a pacifistic or peaceful people, as some people may want you to think. We were very warlike. We didn't establish, like the most peaceful of peaces ever. Even when we were not at war, we still raided and spatted with each other. But still, this required a process of defensive coalition building. We managed to defend vast swaths of land, like across tens of thousands of people, from like raiders and attacks and invasions, without the building of a nation state. Obviously, we, in a lot of instances, we weren't able to build a confederacy as big as like the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. That would have been far more useful for defending ourselves against settler colonialism. But we're not unfamiliar to that idea of building defensive coalitions outside of a nation state apparatus.
Gotcha. So, yeah, my reading of it is just that, like, settlers, I'm just going through this, how the Israeli army is ticking all of the boxes for genocide in Gaza. So, yeah, like I said, there's nothing in this Landback manifesto or anything of that nature that leads me to believe that they want genocide. And from what you're saying, like, indigenous people are more prone to what we could call anarchism because, for the most part, especially in your neck of the woods, the Pacific Northwest, that's how your people have been living for millennia. Like, why would you just accept, like, what exactly does a totalizing system have to offer you all? Like, you've never lived like that. That's something foreign. And for a people, for peoples, for nations who are struggling to assert their autonomy, to assert their rights to what I just listed, food, ceremony, and most importantly, land, all of these things, like, why would you accept an entirely foreign way of looking at the world when you're still struggling to come to grips with half a millennium of being colonized and having your culture damn near destroyed?
Yeah. And like all the systems of governance that we live under right now have all been forced onto us, or we've been coerced into building. Like I've touched upon the band council system before. The band council was like the only way we could obtain some form of political representation with the government, but it was unlike anything we had ever done to self-organize. We had never done a representative democracy before, and now we have. And for like the past 100 years, we've been suffering through corruption, nepotism, and failures to resist corporatism in our nations.
Somebody has a question for you. Would Comrade RBG, would Comrade Ruth Bader Ginsburg consider the Red Nation org committed to the idea of federation? Also, am a brother in the Pacific Northwest, yet to contribute my part. Where do we start? So it looks like you've got an acolyte.
Ah, yes, one of many. The Red Nation, I've only started learning about them very recently, and I have a PDF I downloaded from the website that I have to read. Still, they seem interesting. It comes to like starting. It's like the baby steps that we have to do. They're baby steps in the grand scheme of things, but in the now, in the moment, these are massive steps that we're taking. It's a slow process organization of going out there, trying to educate people, trying to change the political landscape. Not just on your own, you have to network with other people who think like you. Go out and find other warriors who are fighting for the political dignity of your people, and getting all of us organized and educated and networked and making effective political change in our own nations to try and foment some form of sovereigntist movement beyond the one that we have right now.
So I have the Red Nations program pulled up, 6 points. 1, we demand freedom. We are self-determining peoples. We support other self-determining peoples who resist colonizers and U.S. domination around the world. Only people power will determine our destinies. We demand dignity. Everyone deserves free housing, food, water, education, mobility, employment, and healthcare. Everyone deserves spiritual freedom and a livable earth. 3, we demand land back. Mother Earth belongs to nobody, rather we all belong to her. We must restore correct relations with Mother Earth because land is the basis of our livelihoods. Land must be returned to the original caretakers. 4, abolish police. Cops are Indian killers. They are the foot soldiers of U.S. occupation, racism, and misogyny. Cops police the poor and protect private property and the rich. Only we can protect ourselves. Women and gender-variant relatives lead the revolution. We must take back our power and humanity. Women struggle for and sustain the world. With Indigenous Feminism, there is no fascism. Without Indigenous Feminism, there is no freedom. 6, the needs of the people come first. The world has enough resources for everyone. Scarcity is a myth. Capitalism is a for-profit, racist system where rich lives matter the most. We need a world where rich and poor people don't exist. So, I like that. It's pretty good. They also have a nice little political education section.
The indigenous feminism thing is important, I'd say, because indigenous women are like a political backbone for a lot of us. Culturally speaking, the matriarch, the clan mother, is an important element in our self-governance process, especially here in the Pacific Northwest. Like, a matriarch has the authority over a chief, so they can choose to, if they feel like they need to, a woman can basically strip a chief of his rank and title and try to select a new one to delegate her own will, so to speak. And of course, it's something that's been eroded, but today we still have like woman chiefs who control houses and different, I guess, tribal aspects of our society. And indigenous women play an extremely strong role in activism in our side.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things, if we ignore, we can't obtain like true sovereignty.
Yeah, that bears a there were many societies in Africa that were like matrilineally organized like that. And in New Africa, like many of our families, black people in the United States are headed by matriarchs because the plantation owners used to sell our dads away. So it was kind of forced on us. But like a lot of people don't understand. Like they still want to recreate this patriarchal type thing. Like I constantly see black men on the internet saying that where are our fathers? Women belong in the kitchen. And stupid Victorian era bullshit that we learned around Maslow's table. So I'm really glad that you brought that up because like it's important to realize the ways in which women and gender variant people have been essential to the continued existence of our peoples. So I like Red Nation. They've got I think they got into it with PSL a few years back over something. But yeah. If it's one thing
Who
that
hasn't?
if it's one thing that ML revisionists are good at, it's offending indigenous people. So they're also on Twitch. I don't see any videos from them, but they may have some coming out in the future. But I'm going to link to all of this stuff that I'm looking at when I upload this to YouTube. So you've really explained why you as an indigenous person are more keen on anarchist types of organization because like that's what your people have used and it worked very well for you all. So why would you adopt something else? Like why would you adopt something else just because some asshole says it's universal?
And the more recent things that we have adopted, they were forced upon us and they didn't work anyway.
Yeah. Some people would say the same for Marxism, but I would not. It just hasn't been done right. But so you you went on Haz's little, I guess, goofy ass. I'd hate to call it a show because a show is organized, but you went on his thing a few months ago, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Was it like
Honestly, it was one of those things where, like, after I did it, I was like, I don't know what I gained out of this personally.
was
I
it?
guess,
I never watched it because I try to avoid that asshole as
yeah.
often as possible. But like, what was he? What was the gist of his argument?
The idea that the current decolonial effort, for some reason, it's the same thing that's done with BLM. It's trying to disconnect the modern movement from the past movement and try to claim liberal co-option, which is partially true, but if you over exaggerate the extent of that co-option, then you completely undermine the agency of the indigenous people acting right now,
And then,
which is what
like,
Haas was doing.
funny thing is, he talks about BLM and Landback, the Indigenous and the Black Liberation Movement. Not saying that Black Lives Matters to Black Liberation Movement, but when I see BLM, I consciously force myself to think Black Liberation Movement. So he's basically saying that Black people and Indigenous people are bought out, but he supports people like Jackson Hinkle and all these other weirdos who are literally conservative, deep cover reactionary operatives. Is that correct?
Exactly. Yeah.
Like these fucking LaRouchites, like they've been doing this for decades. So these baby LaRouchites, Caleb Maupin, Jackson Hinkle, etc. Like, I was so disgusted when I saw Hinkle trying to. He was posting about the Palestinian resistance for several days, almost a week. And then after that, he started like just grifting. Like, that's what he is. He's a grifter. So Haas hangs out with these fucking grifters and weirdos, but it's our liberation movements that are bought out. Make it make sense.
Exactly.
And yeah, like Black Lives Matter, that is a co-opted organization. Anybody that receives money from the Ford and MacArthur Foundation probably ain't a friend of yours. But what reactionaries like Haas and Maupin do is act as if we have to be social conservatives because the liberal movement is bought out. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Hinkle is just an anti-Semite pretending to be pro-Palestinian as a grip, pretty much. Like, he shared this thing on his Twitter. He identifies as pro-American, so already he's fucking up because, like we just spent the better part of an hour discussing, there is no hope for America. There is no hope for Canada. So, identifying as a pro-American and then calling yourself a communist, they hate postmodernism so much, but they're postmodernists. But anyways, it was like Israel gets an aircraft carrier and this and that, and the American border gets some chuckle fuck on a horse and a cowboy hat in a 6-shooter. So he's basically saying we need to strengthen our borders, but he's a communist. Bizarro world, bizarro land, bizarro land back. So, what would you say is the main issue impacting your people, indigenous people? God, I feel like I'm like a fucking anthropologist. How do your people feel about? But what is the main issue impacting First Nations people in so-called Canada?
Oh, don't worry about the anthropological terminology. I am an anthropologist at heart. I feel. But the most pressing issue is always going to be of land and of trying to mediate how to best get at it. Like trying to build up this movement of ours that we have to be more than just land back, to be more than groups like Indian Collective. That's the difficult part. And trying to work to create a like real militant decolonial effort. And there have been instances in which this has been the case, like with the Wet'suwet'en blockades.
Mm.
Those resulted in Molly Slato, the leader, Molly Wickham, sorry, the Wet'suwet'en blockades. One of the leaders, not the leader. Sorry about my terminology.
You're good.
She made like some, along with the other Wet'suwet'en people, calls for support and like calls to action from settlers who want to be more than allies. We don't need any more allies. We need accomplices now. We need people who want to help us in the act of achieving sovereignty, not just support us. And this resulted in it was called Shut Down Canada, a series of railway blockades by loads of different people, Indigenous people, settlers, um, going out to blockades and ports and blocking off roads. And it happened twice. I think the first time was in 2021 or something, and the next one was 2022. And it definitely had an impact. It put Canada into like a alert mode for for a few months. And that was just a taste of the sort of militancy that Indigenous people can push forward through not just our own people, Indigenous people, but through settlers. We can push settlers into militancy, into acts of militancy, and that is a big deal, even though it was such a short instance of it. And it eventually culminated in a Coyote Camp getting raided by RCMP. 200 RCMP officers were militarized. They were given body armor, assault rifles, the whole 9 yards. They were flown in during a crisis. They were given like planes and helicopters and stuff to get to the Wet'suwet'en as soon as possible, even though even though half the province was getting flooded by torrential downpour. They got there and they walked up to this tiny cabin filled with women and they cut it down with a chainsaw and arrested the women
Wait.
inside.
While the women, they cut the cabin down while the people were still inside?
Yeah, they took a chainsaw to the door
Jesus.
to arrest some of the women there.
That's disgusting.
Yeah, you can find like a video of it at the Get Menton Access Point web YouTube channel. I can link it to you. But
Yeah, show me that.
it just
That's
shows
fucking
you like
horrible.
this wasn't that big of a deal. This wasn't Hamas. Uh, this wasn't Poundmaker or Louis Riel. This was a smaller group of indigenous people rallying alongside settlers, and it incurred such a massive overreaction from the state.
Yeah, so they're afraid of principled settler solidarity with colonized people. Like that's very similar to how they responded to Fred Hampton building the Rainbow Coalition in Chicago. Like that's the thing. Like as long as you're just a single person standing up ranting and raving about the white man, like they'll leave you alone. They think it's funny. It makes them feel powerful. Look what we did to these people. But as soon as you start convincing their kids and their grandkids to join in solidarity with you, then they know they're fucked. And they don't like that at all. And they're going to fuck both your and their worlds up. That shows that solidarity across nations, like that's why I laugh at people who say that why do black people care so much about Palestinians? Palestinians come and open up stores in y'all's neighborhood. Okay, so fucking what? Does that mean that they deserve to be all massacred? No. As a person whose ancestors were brought here as slaves, as a person whose people have been catching sheer unadulterated hell for 500 years, I empathize with them. And I want them to be victorious in their struggle for national liberation. Yeah, a certain strata of petty bourgeois Arab immigrants open up stores and exploit the black community. But Palestinian people in Palestine also demonstrated solidarity with us in Ferguson.
We're surrounded by
Levantine food is goated. I agree.
I also agree.
Officer.
So I pulled
I
up
love
the.
a good donaire.
So this is the raid on Coyote Camp.
With guns. And
This is a private residence and you are trespassing. You need to leave now.
For civil contempt of court.
You are trespassing against Wet'suwet'en law.
Come out peacefully.
Do you have a search warrant or an arrest warrant?
We will be seeking those if you are not going to cooperate.
Well, you better have one.
So instead of going to go get the documents you mentioned, they go and try to break into somebody else's house. Look at these assholes. Like, these are not the friendly Smokey the Bear Mounties. These look just like American cops. Look at this asshole in the back with the fucking rifle.
I know you asked for a warrant to enter. Our authority to enter will come under that injunction.
And mind you, this did occur during a crisis, a provincial crisis. There was a lot of flooding in the area, and a lot of planes and traffic was flooded.
Holy shit, look what they're doing to the door.
Breaking down the door.
They got an axe. That's not a chainsaw. That looks like an axe or something. So, again, they have no documents. They have no authority to enter this woman's house. And instead of going to seek those documents, instead of abiding by the law, they just get an axe or a crowbar or something and just break into the house. These are fucking gun thugs. These are not police.
Get your fucking gun off me! Get your fucking gun
And
off
if there's
me!
anything
Lower
that
your
our
gun!
legal victories have proven to us that we've achieved in this early form of land back that we live in right now, is that Canadian law is extremely selective. They can choose to adhere to it whenever they want.
Yeah, sounds a lot like American law. Like, there are a bunch of constitutional amendments passed after the Civil War during Reconstruction, which stated that black people in this country had civil and political rights. But in the South, we were basically disenfranchised systematically. Like, the similarities are everywhere. Look at this asshole. He's just got a gun aimed at her. Like, these people have done nothing wrong.
Fucking gun off me! This is sovereign Wet'suwet'en land!
There is evidence that they aimed snipers at them in other instances before.
They use snipers in Ferguson, too. They're assholes just laying on top of buildings. And they, like, relish that role. Like, they would just sit up there and point guns at people. Smiling and waving and shit. Like, it's a big joke to them. Bastards.
The RCMP have breached the door. They are acting under the authority of the injunction.
Attack dogs are there.
There are attack dogs here.
Standing there, right beside
Militarized
the door.
police. They used axes found in camp to break down the door.
And a chainsaw.
And a chainsaw that they found in camp.
Come here, Molly, you're under arrest.
So they're stealing their shit. They're stealing the Wet'suwet'en's items, that their axes and their chainsaws they use to get firewood. And they're using it to repress them. Fucking thieves. And he called her by her first name.
Don't touch me.
Don't touch her.
They did that
her
to
government name.
Yeah, they did that to black people too. Like, it doesn't matter if you're 75 years old, a 12-year-old white kid could call you auntie or could call you by your first name, whereas you, a 75-year-old black man, had to refer to this kid as Mr. Johnson. It's a form of dehumanization. Like, doesn't matter how old you are, doesn't matter what degrees you have, it doesn't matter what your occupation is, you are still a boy or your first name.
Get your hands off her!
You're under arrest.
Get your hands off of her! This
You're
is
under
sovereign Wet'suwet'en territory!
Can I get someone to grab her?
It doesn't matter that these are cops, these are still Canadians. Could I get someone to grab her, eh?
Stand up for me.
Like when I was a kid, I thought that like the Canadian police were all those friendly red guys with the big hats and the sitting on horses, and they didn't even have guns. But here you are. This looks like this could be in fucking New Mexico.
You're under arrest. Stand up. Get that out of my face and back up.
On fucking federales, basically.
Okay.
I'm coming with you. I'm coming with you.
You're under arrest. Okay, you're under arrest. Stand up for me.
Well, that's fucked up.
This is Democracy Now!
God, they need to find somebody else to anchor this. Her voice is just so boring. I can't stand this lady. Anyways. So, like I said, like the parallels are astonishing. It just shows how I've been reading this this document, Indigenous Feminism Does Not Discriminate. But it just shows how like colonizers are going to colonize her. They may have different methods, they may wear different uniforms, but they abide by the same methods. This is also something that I wanted to discuss. Like, I really like how they're talking about feminism, because a lot of the MLs and even a lot of MLMs, they are very hostile to feminism, not just bourgeois feminism, which we should all be hostile to, but they're hostile to all forms of feminism because they think that these men, Marx and Engels and Lenin and Stalin and Mao, already settled the women question. Or, like, that's literally how they refer to it. Everybody's a question. Like, they're talking about the indigenous question, or the black question, or the whatever question. Like, that's kind of dehumanizing. Like, we're not questions, we're people. But, they always cite either men or women who are in parties controlled in large part by men to say that we do not need an independent body of work called proletarian feminism is what I ascribe to, which is basically Maoist feminism. But a lot of these guys on the internet, they are opposed to any types of feminism. Never mind what they think about trans comrades. But like you said, indigenous people, they developed feminism before feminism even existed. Like as a concise written theory, because you had a matriarchal system and you had women, matriarchs, with the authority to veto bad decisions that were taken and made by men. This is far more advanced than a lot of leftist groups today, by the way, because your typical leftist group, your typical hardcore Marxist-Leninist group or what have you, they have a shitload of rapists, a shitload of abusers in their organizations, and instead of actually dealing with these men, they expel the people who raise critique and demand action be taken, and they protect the men. Why? Because the men are able to give a good speech at a protest rally, or because the men have access to a large amount of money, or because the men have some other skill that they value over the well-being of women within the organization, right?
Yeah. There's a lot of class reductionism and has a lot to do with it.
Oh, and I'm linking this. There's a lot of good sources on the Red Nation website. But yeah. You've almost convinced me to be an anarchist, Red RBG, but I'm never going to be an anarchist because I'm stubborn. And I still think that, like, at least in the context of the United States, Marxism, Leninism, Maoism has many good theoretical and practical tools that we can use. But I've softened up a lot on anarchism just by reading you all's work and studying, like, how indigenous American and indigenous African societies were organized. And also just by witnessing the outright chauvinism of many of my so-called comrades. Like, I definitely fuck with y'all now. Never mind, there's an entire body of black anarchist theory called anarchatism. So that's your Kawasi Balagoon, Lorenzo Kumboa Irvin, Ashanti Alston, and countless others. Like, a lot of people came out of hardcore ML groups disenchanted by the ways in which these parties and organizations were ran. And they ended up embracing anarchism. So I understand why they did it, for cultural and for political reasons. Plus, within a lot of these ML parties, they were abused horribly. So do I think that there's like a theoretical synthesis between anarchism and Marxism, Leninism, Maoism? I don't think so. That's not convincing. Plus, like, they're from two different philosophical traditions. But
I think
like, there's
it's one of
things.
those things where it has to be outside of the traditions, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Like, found within the I guess the stage of struggle, because a lot of organizations don't find themselves inside of struggle.
No, they find themselves in
They
find themselves in struggle on Twitter all the time, and they might find themselves in struggle with abusers within their organization, but they don't find themselves in class struggle.
Yeah, like with these Zapatistas, the Zapatistas started off as a Maoist group, but they're not anymore. Yeah, I forget what was the name of the original group, ELN or something like that.
Uh-huh.
And as they used mass line to integrate with the indigenous Mayan people. And the Mayans just did not care for vanguardist ways of governance and political organization. So I guess through mass line, eventually the Zapatistas adopted a more libertarian, Marxist, socialist way of governance.
Yeah.
Which is very inspiring.
Honestly, I see black people doing that as well. Like, part of the reason why I've become softer on anarchism is because, like, I've actually integrated more with my people. Like, if all you hang out with is white leftists with power fetishes, yeah, you got time for that shit. But, like, black people, like, we are very, very, very skeptical of authority. For good reason. The same reason that indigenous people are skeptical of authority. It's been used to fuck us over. So, yeah, you're not going to run into the hood and being like, hey, like, that's why, like, I laugh at those Bob Avakian people, the RCP. Like, you're not going to go into a black neighborhood and be like, hey, you should tell your preacher to get lost and follow this old-ass Armenian dude who's probably dead and we're playing Weekend at Bernie's with his body. Like, that's not going to work. So we have to respect the culture and tradition and background of people that we're trying to organize. And in many cases, it may be necessary for us to change certain of our views in accordance with the traditions and customs, productive, positive customs, rather, of the masses, because the masses do have some very backwards customs. Like, should we be misogynists because many of the men in the masses are misogynists? No, that's right opportunism and chauvinism in the extreme. So part of why we should use theory is not to be smarter than anybody on the internet, but rather we use theory to differentiate right from wrong, right?
Yeah.
So do you have any questions for me?
And I'll let you know this.
Go ahead.
Like, I'm an anarchist, but when I'm away from settler colonial society and I find myself in my land, the land of the Misty River, the Cassian River, I don't consider myself an anarchist because I don't really need to. I'm a sovereigntist amongst my people, but when I'm not away from my people, I am an anarchist. And I think that once we've obtained some sort of decolonized space, like we see in Chiapas with the Zapatistas, like those distinctions between Maoist or Marxist or anarchist, they become secondary. And what you have in front of you, that real struggle, that real revolution right there, that should be the priority when it comes to ideology and organizing.
Yeah, like Palestine has shown us. You've got people who
its own thing.
Yeah, like we're seeing that in Palestine right now. Like, you've got people from varying strains of thought who have joined together to make revolution. So in struggle, like there's an old saying, there is no atheist in a foxhole. Like when these bombs and shit start actually falling on us, and when the police are coming through the door with axes and chainsaws, like all of that shit goes out the window. Like they're not going to refuse to arrest me because I'm a Maoist and arrest you because you're an anarchist. They're going to see, okay, we've got this brown person and we've got this darker brown person over here. Let's arrest them both because they're doing bad things. So, yeah, like that shit really only matters to white people on the internet. I mean, it matters, but when you're doing good work is good work, regardless of who on the left is doing it, right?
Oh, yeah.
All right. You got any questions for me?
None that I can think of. Terrible with questions.
Why'd you steal my name and change it to yourself?
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. Brand recognition. You see, internally, I'm a kulak, all right? Which means I have to do everything I can to get my bag of grain into my shed.
I'm going to sue you. I might not get much. I might not get anything but a bunch of fish, but I'm going to sue you. Actually, you're more likely to give you a bunch of pink sand. Actually, you're more likely to come down here and smack the shit out of me. But anyways, anything else you want to discuss? Any stupid things you've read on the internet lately?
I mean, there's an infinite amount of things.
Oh, this is the guy who supposedly did the shooting. His name is Robert Card. We started off talking about the we should have done this Discord call thing. Like, I've been able to hear you clearly. We haven't had any interruptions. I guess that's what Mao was talking when he said we should learn through practice. So, you know, it always makes me sad when I hear about these things. But like living in the United States, I guess I'm sort of desensitized. So more about this town. It's the second most populous city in Maine. It has 38,493 people in it. Median household income, $48,000. 83.4% white, 7.3% black. I didn't know black people lived anywhere in Maine. I did not know this. But yeah. Has Canada ever had a mass shooting?
Plenty. There was one at a university that was big, Polytechnic University.
Oh, in Montreal?
There was another one more recently in Nova Scotia. Yeah, Montreal Massacre, École Polytechnique Massacre.
Oof. So this guy, this guy they're looking for is a certified firearms instructor and a member of the U.S. Army Reserve. Yikes. Yeah. Not a very nice person. Hope they kill him.
I can only hope.
Yeah. Well, anything you want to close out with?
I would say keep an eye out for a lot of viewers to keep an eye out on the Indigenous struggle here in the Pacific Northwest and everywhere else, to be honest. I try to always keep my eye out for Indigenous resistance movements in North and South America. It's difficult, but keeping my eye on it has been very encouraging to me, mentally speaking. Like groups like the Zapatistas, the Mapuche insurgency, among a couple of other ones. It's been quite emboldening to know that I'm not alone. My people are not alone, and we're all fighting in this struggle against the settler colonial system.
Oh, Twin Rabbit follows me. Cool. I'm gonna watch some of their YouTube videos tonight. Anyways, what's this? You linked me something else?
There's a lot of resistance to this project that is...
This is another reason why I like anarchists, because like I've never heard of Maoists being blamed for anything like this.
Outside of
Just upstream.
Like, at the end of the day, y'all are the ones that are throwing down. Maoists just talk about throwing down. That's why I respect y'all so much. We're just a bunch of bullshitters.
Well, Maoists used to throw down, didn't they? The Weather Underground.
The Weather
among other
Underground.
things.
The Weather Underground weren't Maoists. They were proto third worldists / college kids who just wanted to have orgies and blow up bathrooms.
Make way for a section of the coastal
Based.
He's been trying to get up
Yeah,
close.
that sounds like a group you would enjoy. until they gave you LSD and subjected you to a 15-hour-long struggle session.
Security won't let him.
On the other hand, you might enjoy that too.
Oh, who knows?
But Chief Namox is turned away because the worksite is also a crime scene.
Well, I have
They
to log
emerge
off.
from the
I have some
forest
important
around
things to
midnight.
handle.
All right. Anytime, Dex. It was good talking to you.
Nice. Thank you for this.
No
This is
problem.
great. This is a great conversation.
Indeed. Let's have more.
In February
So I'm going to wrap up with this, and then I'm going to go upload this and go to sleep.
of last year, firing flare guns and swinging axes into the side of security trucks. An excavator on site was used to destroy other heavy machinery and mobile trailers.
You can destroy the enemy's works with his own tools.
The estimated damage as high as $20 million.
It was planned, it was practiced, and carried out in a very methodical manner.
Carried out.
Chief Superintendent John Brewer is in charge of the Community Industry Response Group, or
That is one big Canuck.
CURG, an
I'm a fucking bear, yeah?
RCMP unit formed to police resistance to the pipeline and other projects like it. 8 months after the worksite attack, the CURG was also targeted in a late-night arson attack. 4 RCMP vehicles and some others nearby destroyed. It wasn't always like this. For more than a decade, protests against the pipeline had been peaceful. But the last RCMP raid in the
A moose is loose in the hoose, and he's wearing a police uniform, eh?
fall of 2021 marked a major turning point. For the first time in the conflict, the protesters were charged with criminal contempt of court. And at the same time, Coastal GasLink was finally able to ramp up operations here. That's when things turned violent down at the worksite. That was more than a year ago. RCMP...
This is the thing. This is the thing that always gets me. Why are you continuing to build pipelines on people's land without their permission? Like, of course they're going to sabotage it. You didn't ask them, because if you had asked them, they would say no. So you're just going to, in your settler colonial arrogance, displaying your lack of wisdom, you're going to do it anyway. And then you're going to bring in the cops when they fuck it up, because they don't want you there. Just go home. You're not going to win.
Had 40 investigators on the case. A $100,000 reward had been posted, and the attackers are still out there. How close are you to making an arrest, timeline-wise?
I have been saying to my team, we are weeks away for the last few months, certainly before the new year. I believe we are that close.
This is the first time he's revealing key details of the investigation into the worksite attack, saying police have identified more than half a dozen suspects and have been tracking their movements. Examining videos like this one the protesters posted just weeks before the attack.
This just shows that anything you put on the internet can and will be used against you. So be smart.
A masked and camo-wearing group pulling trees and tires across the road. Was it a rehearsal? They're the same impediments officers encountered trying to get up the only road to the worksite that night. So how did the attackers escape, if not down that road? Police say the group fled the worksite on snowmobiles, using the pipeline right-of-way, which runs parallel to the road. When they reached a protest camp, the attackers made their getaway in waiting trucks, while police were still busy assessing the threat at the worksite and securing the crime scene. Investigators later recovered DNA evidence there, the destruction also holding clues. Not everyone knows how to operate an excavator, and police know who among the protesters can. But after more than a year,
They are very thorough. Yeah, they'll scrape your DNA, and they will like research your background. Okay, who here has construction experience? Who knows how to drive an excavator? So we can narrow down their list of suspects. Cops are dumb, but they're not plumb dumb. They still do their jobs.
Investigating, the Mounties have concluded that it's not the local group that planned the attack. John Brewer believes it was orchestrated and largely executed by outside forces.
Are you suggesting that the people who are involved, the suspects that you have in the worksite attack...
Why does this guy dress and kind of look like Jordan Peterson?
Came and infiltrated the group, that's the word you just used, and had some sort of attachment to the anarchist movement, such as it is in Canada?
Yeah, I think it's safe to say whether they are directly part of the anarchist movement or believe in it or use their tactics, absolutely.
No one has claimed responsibility for the worksite attack, but an anonymous post on an anarchist website did take credit for the arson. The same website where credit was taken for damage to drilling equipment at a Calgary storage yard. The latest posting, a claim of sabotage, that before they were buried, some pipes had tiny holes drilled into them. Far from infiltrating the local protest group, anarchists were actually invited.
Hi, I'm Rob.
The chief took us to meet Molly Wickham.
Which do you prefer,
Nobody invites Maoists to places.
Molly or Slato? Okay.
The local protest leader, who goes by Slato, has called for anarchists to join the cause.
Calling on you, our allies, other Indigenous nations, labor unions, anarchist groups.
You called for people from that movement to be a part of this movement.
Oh yeah, we have a lot of people that we've worked with in the past that are amazing, great human beings.
But may have participated in that. So do you feel some responsibility for that then, if you called for them to come here?
Absolutely not.
Who do you think is responsible for that attack?
I don't have an idea.
Do you understand why I might find that hard to believe?
Yes, I do.
Why are you trying to lead her into admitting culpability or knowledge of a crime? That's not the role of a journalist.
Because we've been here, absolutely not.
And why wouldn't you have a sense of who would be behind that? They were clearly doing it in solidarity with...
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of resistance to this project that
She should say the oil company is responsible.
is outside of ourselves.
So who are the outsiders? Police aren't saying who their suspects are, and we don't know. We did pull the court documents on every...
This is the most Canadian-looking dude I've ever seen. Like, if I were to draw a picture of a Canadian, I would draw this guy.
Arrest
He's got the fucking flannel, he's got the boots, he's got the smug demeanor.
made in the conflict zone, and the details are revealing. About
All he needs is a cup of Timmy's in his hand.
70% of the people taken into custody were not from this area. Some were from other parts in BC, others other provinces, and even the US. And more than one of them had ties to the anarchist movement.
Our nation was hijacked. Our nation's name was hijacked. They've taken our name and put it in a bad spotlight all across Canada.
Bonnie George works for Coastal GasLink. She's also Wet'suwet'en and believes the violence has done lasting damage to her people, saying many protesters feel the same and have left the movement.
The community members were just disgusted by what happened.
We've got 540 kilometers of pipe already in the ground on the project. So
He's a smarmy hoser.
This is heavy
Coastal
equipment for
GasLink says the
moving
pipeline is now 85% complete, but police believe as long as work on the pipeline continues, the threat of violence here remains.
So stop building the pipeline.
The tunneling under the pure water.
Also, there's no violence. Nobody got hurt. Like, none of the workers are getting hurt. You're referring to property damage as violence. Fucking capitalist chills. I'm going to bed. Good night. Thanks again.